When you're working on a high-end project for a client and you're working with a small team and they're relying on you to get it done and you have just enough materials, you really don't want to mess it up. So today we're at the shop with Jay from Harris by Hand, and looking around, you're at a different level of woodworking than I will ever be. I mean, I'm looking at this wall here. You have like a $12,000 felder over there. You have a kiln in your backyard. So what kind of work do you do?
No, I mean, mostly standalone furniture, dining room tables, coffee tables, things like that. Right now I'm building this cherry bench. It's like a, like a breakfast nook kind of thing, like an L-shaped bench. All solid wood, except for obviously the panels that we're going to be doing with some veneers. But yeah, which I'm excited for.
Oftentimes when I take on a new freelance project, I'm not responsible for the whole thing. Usually, I have a smaller part in a much larger project. I'm usually working on some sort of team. Well, this project is no different, except this time, I'm going to show you how I did it, because it's a really cool technique. So what are we doing? Well, Jay is creating this high-end bench for a client that includes these 5 sliding door panels. And he asked Caitlin from K-Chow Studios to design a continuous geometric pattern that flows from one door panel to the next. And then he asked me to laser cut her designs and to glue everything up. Now I've already gone ahead and I've created a smaller prototype of one of the panels just to get the process down before I start digging into all the expensive materials. And as you can see, we're going to be laser cutting some cherry, some wenge, and then we're going to glue everything up to a 1/2 inch thick sheet of MDF. Now while this looks really simple, I promise you there are a few techniques that are worth sticking around for. So with that said, let's start cutting our MDF and our veneer sheets down to size. So I wanted to mention that I'm cutting my MDF and my veneer sheets to be slightly oversized just to make it a little bit easier to work with these materials in the laser cutter. All right, so we've got our cherry and our wenge for the front. Got our MDF for the middle, and we've got our cherry veneer for the back. Now remember, there's 5 panels, so I had to cut 5 sets of these. This is just for panel 1. But now let's switch gears and let's prepare our file for the laser cutter. So as you can see, I'm in Adobe Illustrator now, and this blue line, well, this indicates the final size of our panel. However, I made our panel a little bit oversized. I gave it a border, and I did that for 2 reasons. And this is something that I learned when building the prototype. The first reason is that it's going to make it much easier to assemble. And you can see this in this acrylic prototype that I created. If it's one solid piece, nothing falls apart. Compare that to this. If I cut everything to the exact size, everything is just in pieces, and it's going to be really hard to do that glue up. So it just makes it easier to have everything come out of the laser cutter in one piece so that later on I can just plop everything in and it'll work out. The other reason I did this, you can see from this line right here, that's a score line. That's not going to be a cut line. Once everything's glued up, there's a little bit of squeeze out, which I can't have. I need nice clean edges. So what I can do is after I glue everything up, I can take a track saw and I can cut along that score line. And then what you're left with is a nice clean edge. So you don't have to sand it or put it through the plane or anything weird like that. So it just makes it nice and clean. Hopefully that makes sense. So now I'm going to bring this into Lightburn. And you can see that we're going to do our score line first, this cut line second, and then the outline third. So here we are, starting with that score line. And now we're going to cut out our shape. Now I have 5 laser cutters. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous, but I just love watching these things work. It's like magic. Now we're going to finish up cutting out the outline. And you can see why we made the panels slightly oversized. It just makes things easier. All right, great. Check this out. It's all in one piece. And now it's time to prepare the wenge. So I'm going to go back into light burn. And the first thing that I'm going to do is get rid of those borders. We don't need those anymore. I only need to cut out this piece right here. However, I need to cut this piece out just a little bit bigger than this to account for the kerf, or the material lost by the laser beam. So how do we do that? Well, I'm going to double click in our settings, and inside of this window we can change the kerf for this piece here to be 0.008. So when I click OK, what that did is it just made that piece just a tiny bit larger. Okay, so why is that important? Let me show you. So using the same acrylic template we used before, if I place this piece in here, a piece without any kerf correction, you're going to see some gaps here, and that's not good. Let's get a closer shot of that. However, if I take this piece out and I put this piece in, this piece was kerf corrected, you're going to notice that this is going to snap in perfectly. See, now there's no gaps whatsoever. So now we're going to send this file to the laser cutter, and we're going to cut out our wenge. So you might be asking, how did you get that number, 0.008 inches? Well, frankly, I just experimented. 0.006 was too small, 0.012 was too big. 0.008 inches was perfect for this material on this particular laser. So as you saw, that cut beautifully on the Thunder. Now before I do a glue up, I just want to do a quick dry fit just to make sure that everything looks okay. And everything looks great. It looks perfect. Oh, this is awesome. So now let's do our glue up. So we're going to need a couple of things. We need some clamps, some battens, some veneer glue, some wax paper, wet paper towel, and some veneer tape. Okay, so I have all the materials that I need for the glue up, and I'm going to start by applying some veneer glue to the sheet of MDF. Now you want to apply the glue to the MDF and not the veneer. If you apply glue to the veneer, it's going to fold up like a taco, and we definitely don't want that happening. So I'm just going to spread some of this glue right over here like that. And if you have a roller, that makes it a little bit faster. Couldn't find my roller today, so this is going to work just fine. Okay, so I'm going to use the back piece first, and I'm simply just going to line it up like that. Everything's nice and covered. I'm going to flip it over and do the same thing to the other side. Okay, so now we're going to do the front, and this is going to be a little bit more tricky than the back, but really it's not that difficult. So the first thing that we're going to do is I'm going to take this piece of cherry veneer that's all in one piece, and I'm going to place it on our MDF. Then I'm going to take each piece of cut wenge and I'm going to put it exactly where it needs to go. And I don't know if you can hear this, but it almost snaps into place. It's very satisfying. It's like a puzzle. And I can probably get away with just doing this, but just to be extra safe, I'm going to apply some of this veneer tape. And this veneer tape comes in a couple of different styles. This style here has holes so that if we wanted to, we could sand the veneer off once it dries and it's, after we apply it. Or you can get the solid stuff. I just like the stuff with holes because it's just easier to work with, I think. And I also have this wet paper towel. So let me show you how this works. I'm gonna put this here. I'm gonna take a piece of veneer tape and you kind of just wet it. Make sure you can see it. Put this in the middle first. I kind of just wet the veneer tape and then I just put it somewhere like that and that's it. And I basically do that for the whole design basically. And what this is gonna do is just gonna keep it in place while it dries. Now the next thing that we have to do, now that everything's all glued up, is that we have to clamp it. So to do that, I'm going to use some wax paper and I'm going to put some wax paper on the front. And the wax paper prevents the glue from adhering to the plywood that we're going to sandwich it with in a second. And so I'm using some scrap plywood that's roughly the same size, and I'm going to put one piece here. I'm going to flip this whole thing over and do the same thing for the other side. Now I think you could also use melamine if you have it, and you won't even need the wax paper, but I don't really have any, so this is going to be just fine. I'll take my other sheet, pop that in there, and I don't know how well you can see this, but essentially we've made a sandwich. We've got plywood, wax paper, our veneer and MDF, and then again wax paper and our plywood. So now we're going to clamp these together. Make sure that's the top. Yep, that's the top. And to do that, we're just going to use these clamps right here. I have a ton of them, but you can use any kind of clamp. I'm also going to use these battens. I don't know if these are required. This is a smaller piece, but I think I'm going to use them. It's better to be safe than sorry. Unfortunately, this piece is about an inch too big for the vacuum bag that I have. Otherwise, I wouldn't be clamping this at all. And I'm going to be using the vacuum bag in my next YouTube video where we make laserable plywood. So go check that out pretty soon. But we're just going to use these battens, and what we're going to do is going to put them here at the bottom. And I'm going to put these little guys here too. Sometimes people use tape so that when we apply pressure, this is going to help make sure that the middle of our board also gets pressure. So I'm going to put some there like that. And I'm going to put some 3 here like that. Line them up. And now I'm going to start adding our clamps. So I'm just going to add just as many as I have. And we're going to let this sit overnight. Okay, great. So now we're just gonna let this sit overnight. And when I come back tomorrow, we're gonna unclamp everything, trim it down, sand it, and then send it all over to Jay so he can finish up the cabinet. All right, cool. Okay, so it's the next day, and now we're going to unclamp this to see how we did. Right, great. This looks perfect, beautiful. Okay, so now the next step is to take off this tape. Now this tape has holes, so it's designed so that you can simply sand it off. However, I learned in my prototype that when I sanded the tape off on the prototype, it actually went through the veneer a little bit because the veneer is super thin. So I'm gonna be a little bit more careful. So instead, I'm going to use this damp rag and I'm going to lightly dampen the tape again. And what this is going to allow me to do is that if I wait just a few minutes, I'm going to be able to take the rest of the tape off by scraping it with this plastic razor. So I think I'm just going to let this sit for just a couple of minutes till that glue gets soft again, and then I'm going to take everything off with that razor. It's been about 10 minutes, so hopefully this comes off relatively easily. So I'm going to take my razor and I'm gently just going to scrape everything off. Now I like the plastic razors because they're not going to scratch anything. Yeah, this looks great. There are literally no gaps in this whole thing. Excellent. So now the next step is to bring this over to the track saw, and we're going to cut along those score lines so that we can get our board to the exact size we need while still maintaining those clean edges. Great. Well, now we sand. This looks so good. Check this out. Wow, super smooth. But now we've got to do 4 more.
.001 thicker, the cherry.